Welcome to Taking Up Space, the podcast with conversations exploring what it means to inhabit our bodies fully without shame or apology and reconnect with our innate wisdom to find healing and body liberation. I'm your host, Cassie Krajewski, a licensed clinical social worker, certified sex therapist, and certified body trust practitioner. For over 10 years, I've worked with women and marginalized folks to reclaim their bodies, their inner knowing, and their lives in a world that often seeks to diminish their voices and experiences. In this podcast, we'll unpack the societal norms and expectations that interrupt our embodiment, like trauma, oppression, illness and pain, and the social constructs of gender, race, sexuality, beauty, health, and weight. My hope is that through this podcast, we'll learn to drop into our bodies and give ourselves permission to occupy space, physically, emotionally, relationally, and intellectually, with more confidence and authenticity. Join us as we challenge societal norms, explore what it means to find wholeness and reclaim our right to take up space as an act of resistance and body liberation. While this podcast might feel therapeutic, it is not psychotherapy and doesn't constitute a therapist-client relationship. This is a good time to mention, too, that this podcast will at times use adult language, so listener discretion is advised. If you are interested in diving in deeper, make sure you check out my online shop where I'm currently offering my Taking Up Space workbook for free. This workbook includes thought-provoking exercises, reflective journal prompts, and actionable strategies that can help guide you towards a deeper understanding of yourself and your needs and cultivate a more profound sense of embodiment and your own liberation. You can find this workbook and other resources at my website. That's inneratlastherapy.com/shop. Hey, welcome to another episode of Taking Up Space. Today, we have an incredible guest with us who brings both professional expertise and personal lived experience to the table. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Marianne Miller. Dr. Marianne is a dedicated eating disorder therapist based in San Diego, California. Not only is she a licensed marriage and family therapist in several states, but she's also a coach who specializes in the treatment of binge eating disorder and avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, or ARFID. In our conversation, Dr. Marianne shares deeply personal insights about her own journey and challenges and the transformative power of authenticity in her work. She's going to share about some of her own body story, telling how her history with eating disorders and neurodivergence has shaped her therapeutic approach, and how by publicly sharing her journey on social media, she emphasizes the importance of authenticity to inspire and empower other people. Her story is such a testament to the possibilities of healing your relationship with your body and with food. One of the most compelling aspects of my conversation with Dr. Marianne today is how she integrates her values of social justice into her therapy work. She speaks passionately about her journey into feminism and intersectional feminism and how it has served as a gateway to a broader understanding of social justice issues, including those that impact eating disorders. So addressing systemic issues like racism, sexism, and fat phobia. She ensures that her clients' experiences are validated and understood within that larger societal context. It's essential for her. We're also going to take some time in our conversation today to dive into the intricacies of binge eating disorder. Dr. Marianne clarifies some common misconceptions of binge eating disorder, highlighting the importance of both physiological and psychological healing. Dr. Marianne also is going to explore the damaging effects of diet culture and the importance of body liberation in healing from binge eating disorder by helping her clients understand the broader social systems influencing their fears, their behaviors, their thoughts. She fosters a more compassionate and liberating approach to recovery and healing. Dr. Marianne's commitment to authenticity, social justice, and holistic healing is not only inspiring, but in my opinion, essential. Her work exemplifies how bringing one's whole self into your healing process can create more meaningful and effective embodiment, healing, and body liberation. I'm incredibly grateful to Dr. Marianne for sharing her wisdom and experiences with us in this conversation. For everyone listening, I hope this invites you into a space where you can self-reflect and tune into your own authentic self and how that informs your own embodiment. So thanks for being here and stay tuned. Here's my enlightening conversation with Dr. Marianne Miller. Hi, Dr. Marianne. Welcome to Taking Up Space. I really appreciate you being here.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. I'm excited.
Could you tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
I'm an eating disorder therapist, and I also do coaching with binge eating disorder and ARFID. And I live in San Diego, California, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in California, Texas, and Washington, D.C. And then if you're outside of those three states, I can work with you on binge eating and on ARFID, or if you need help with your children who have ARFID. And I also have a binge eating recovery online self-paced membership program.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And thank you. And a podcast called Dr. Marianne Land. It's an eating recovery podcast.
Which is so good. We'll definitely link all of those things in our show notes because you offer such beautiful, inspirational content over there.
Oh, thank you, Cassie. I appreciate it.
We'll talk about your various areas of specialization today, but before we dive into the expertise and all of the knowledge that you have, something else that I was hoping we could make some space for is how you bring in your lived experience to your work. Could you share a bit about that, how your own body story impacts the work that you do?
I'm really glad you asked that. I don't think anyone who's interviewed me on their podcast has asked that question in that particular way in terms of how has my lived experience affected my work. And it has been about 2 years since I, quote, went public with my eating disorder history and put myself out there on Instagram, let everybody see my whole body. And I live in a fat body. I'm a fat woman. And there were multiple things that kept me from disclosing up until that point. I was a full-time professor from 2006 to 2018. And so I didn't want my students, my grad students, knowing that.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And then the earlier part of that time, I was in recovery myself, and then I recovered from an eating disorder. And then the latter part, I just really, as a therapist, I was like, okay, I need to keep it separate. And then I got to the point where I realized I had this lived experience of recovery and that in order to inspire people that recovery is possible, even when you've had an eating disorder for several decades. Mine lasted probably around 25 years-ish. And that it is absolutely possible to recover completely from that. It's important. It wasn't really important for me to share with people that it's possible, that you can have hope. It's actually been really freeing.
Yes, I can imagine. Say more.
I grew up in a family of origin that was like, my dad is British, and then my mom is from the South in the United States. And so both of those, I think the combination really lent itself to really both not disclosing what's really going on in the family. So having it hidden, and then having like the circle the wagons. We deal with stuff in the family we do not share openly. And then even within the family, sharing openly about emotions and things was discouraged, which was especially challenging for me, who is neurodivergent, has sensory processing sensitivity, is a very, I have a very rich inner life, very deep feeler. And to have that shut down, I think was really, it was really stifling. And it was one of the things that led to the development of my eating disorder.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that created that perfect storm. And so when I made the choice to go public, I was really taking a stand. I wouldn't say against my family. It was more like taking a stance against the narrative
Mm.
of a
Yeah.
narrative of we keep silent, we keep
Mm-hmm.
secrets,
Mm-hmm.
we don't ask for help, all those things. I'd worked on the asking for help thing for decades. And then I think I was ready and the timing was right. And then in 2023, I disclosed the fact that I'm neurodivergent. And I'd
Mm-hmm.
known that ever since I was like in the 90s, although we called it a highly sensitive person back then. It didn't really develop the term sensory processing sensitivity
Mm-hmm.
until later. It didn't really become part of the neurodivergent umbrella until later.
Right.
And that has also been very helpful and very freeing. And I think it's been very helpful for even for people who are seeking help and who come to me as
Mm-hmm.
clients, is they're like, oh, she gets it.
Mm.
She
Yep.
really gets it. And I may not have the exact story or history as my clients. I understand what it's like to have obsessive thoughts and behaviors around food, eating, and body image, where
Mm-hmm.
that consumed like 90% of your
Yep.
brain's functioning in a day.
Yep.
And I also know what it's like to take it from 90% down to 10%, if not 5%.
Yeah.
I know
Mm.
what that feeling is like. Some of my clients do a lot of research on me prior. They follow me on Instagram.
Yeah. Like
2
not
years
conventional
ago.
within traditional therapy
Right.
practice, which I'm not saying is a good thing. It's just a real pushback
Yeah.
against that, though.
Yeah, it is. It is to push back against like how I was trained as a
Yeah.
therapist for sure,
Yeah.
where it not was not quite like the blank slate
Mm-hmm.
approach of where
Mm-hmm.
you just are nothing and you really don't show much of your personality. But it was not too far off of that.
Yeah.
And over the years, I've learned to just really bring my personality and my
Yeah.
authentic self in it,
Yeah.
and clients respond very well to that. And it was a natural progression of me just showing my authentic self in
Mm-hmm.
all the flavors, all the histories
Mm-hmm.
to the world. And nothing but good things have come. Now, have I had the haters out there on
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Instagram? Yeah, and I have a virtual assistant that blocks us people.
That what
So
a gift you gave yourself there.
I,
Yes.
well, I knew that's what I had to do.
Yeah,
There,
that's
you
so
know,
protective.
is especially being a highly sensitive person, is that I
Yeah.
knew that I just could not
Mm-hmm.
open that box,
Yeah.
and so I have someone who takes care of that. And yeah, I was talking to someone, they said, I've never seen like haters on your comments. I'm like, oh, that's because they're deleted and blocked by my
Yeah.
virtual assistant who is amazing.
Yes. We're making this a safe place.
We are making this a safe place for
Mhm.
everyone. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I love when eating disorder providers, therapists bring in their lived experience to the work, because I've talked about this in a number of other interviews on the podcast so far, where for a long time there's been this culture of eating disorder therapists may have had lived experience, but the narrative is I don't struggle with that anymore, or I can't own that
Yeah.
because, how is that going to negatively impact what happens in this therapeutic space? And I
Mhm.
agree, as I've also recently become more public with my own lived experience with an eating disorder, I haven't regretted it. And it's only enhanced, I think, the space for safety and inviting people into their own process a little bit differently. And it changes the hierarchy, I think, right?
Absolutely.
Makes it
Yes.
truly more collaborative and something that's co-created in that
Yeah.
therapeutic space.
It's very interesting. I have the story. It doesn't have to do about eating disorders, but as a result of my eating disorder behaviors, I injured my back severely and
Mm,
developed chronic pain. There are some like limitations like in my life of like things that I can and can't do
Okay.
because of that. But when I injured my back and I'd gotten my doctorate, I was looking for academic positions. And like literally a month after I got my doctorate, I injured my back. What I had to do in terms of like having subsequent surgeries and getting all the medications and treatment is I would be seeing people for a while and then I would have to take 2.5, 3 months off. Like I was bedridden for 2.5 months
Oh.
and then come back. I had actually two sets of clients. One was a cisgendered hetero man, and one was a lesbian couple. I didn't even say anything, but they started noticing that I had chronic pain. The man saw that I had a TENS unit. I don't know whether you know what that is,
Mm-hmm.
but it has the little stickies
Right.
that they put to the area that you have the pain and the little cords, and it gives like electric
Mm-hmm.
pulses that helps distract you from the pain. And so he saw that I had one of those. And this was a man with whom I had really had a hard time connecting. Um,
Hmm.
and then I came back with the TENS unit. He was talking, and then in the middle of therapy, he paused and he said, "Is that a TENS unit?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Do you have chronic pain?" And I
Mm.
said, "Yes." Dynamics of our therapeutic relationship completely shifted.
Wow. Hmm.
Yes. And to where like things just began flowing and progress began happening a lot more rapidly than it had before that.
Hmm.
And it was just amazing. And he ended up doing very well and discharged and everything. And then with the lesbian couple, I remember I had to cancel. I was still managing the pain, and there were some days that I just had to cancel. And
Mm-hmm.
they had some chronic health concerns. And they said, "We actually appreciate it when you cancel
Mm-hmm.
because that shows us it's okay to take time off and take care of
Yeah.
yourself."
Yeah.
And and
Modeling is huge.
that
That's the
modeling is
intervention.
huge. It is an intervention. It's
Hmm.
totally therapeutic.
Hmm.
And having a lived experience of an eating disorder history and being neurodivergent and talking about how I take care of myself and the different things I do to take care of my sensory needs and to nourish
Hmm.
myself and continue my growth and things like that. I don't talk about it a lot in therapy, but I talk about it a lot on social media and in my
Hmm.
newsletter and in my podcast. And I think
Hmm.
people knowing that is modeling. It's
Hmm.
modeling. It gives people like a vision of,
Yeah.
oh, okay,
Yeah.
this is what life could be like, and this is how life could be, being recovered and
Yeah.
being able to live a life in relationship with my different flavors of neurodiversity kind of
Hmm.
thing. And so it's all a journey. As long as I keep growing, they keep growing, we're all growing together until
Yeah.
yeah, as long as I'm breathing, I'm growing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such humanness to bring in to the space and humanness in relationship. That's what we know is the most effective intervention anyway. Something that I've reflected on in myself of for a long time when I was really buttoned up about my own lived experiences, whether it was eating disorder or something else related to my story, just how that was a perpetuation, I think, of diet culture and needing to be a certain way and performed in a certain way, performing recovery in a certain way, perhaps. And the more I got into my own embodiment, it just felt so much more intolerable, actually, for me. And everyone has to be in their own process. Not everyone has to recover out loud. But I know for me, I reached a point where I was like, actually, I'm living in the same systems and I'm complying with these same systems and continuing to stay silent or buttoned up
Mm,
around these things is holding me back from living
mhm,
fully. Hmm.
Yes, that's an excellent point. And I think, especially my family of origin history,
Hmm.
my cultural roots, the multi-generational transmission of cultural patterns around beliefs
Yeah.
about emotions and,
Yeah.
you know, my mom growing up in the 50s Southern
Hmm.
white woman. It's all about
Appearance.
appearances.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and
Right.
being a certain way, especially as a woman.
Right.
And so really I was taking a stance and changing that cycle,
Hmm.
changing the cycle, changing the narrative,
Yeah. Breaking it. Hmm.
breaking it, living, taking up space,
Yeah.
taking
Yeah.
up space
Yep.
and living out loud instead
Hmm.
of living repressed. And I think
Yeah.
my religious background
Mm.
also contributed to that sense of
Mm. Hmm.
repression. I was
Mm.
thinking about that this morning of repression as growing up female,
Mm.
repression in growing up and having dreams and goals of my own in terms of being a leader, which that wasn't
Mm.
allowed in the
Hmm.
particular religious
Yeah.
organization in which I grew up. Even some elitism and belief systems about this is the only way to get to heaven kind of thing that was
Hmm.
so from a social justice standpoint was is just
Hmm.
so like repressive and appalling.
Yeah.
And I could go on and on and talking about that, but I think that me taking a stance and opening up and taking up space, even about my spiritual beliefs and how
Mm.
we left the religious organizations and how I've developed a very broad, all encompassing, integrative view of
Mm.
spirituality
Hmm.
and how social justice it's very important to me and it's a big part of how I see
Yeah.
the world.
Yeah.
I think taking up space has to include all of those things, and it absolutely informs my work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in many ways, I don't feel like I can help people to take up space themselves if
Hmm.
I'm not taking up
Hmm.
space myself.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Well said. I totally agree. I appreciate you bringing in some of these other cultural influences as it relates to how you engage with your body, with your emotions, with food, and one of them being religious or spiritual trauma. There's so many intersections of how those things overlap and interrupt our embodiment and our ability to feel like we can take up space. As you just mentioned, social justice being a big part of how you envision your work. One of your specializations is binge eating disorder and working with
Mhm.
folks that are working through that process or finding healing or recovery, perhaps. How does your values of social justice inform your treatment of binge eating disorder? What's the overlap for you? I know that's a really big question, but I think it's very unique how you think of binge eating disorder in a really systemic way.
I appreciate you saying that. That's a great question, and you have fabulous questions. I Yeah, I love it when people ask me questions that really get me thinking and my juice is flowing, and this is one of them. I really began learning about feminism. Like I would say feminism was
Your
the
entry
doorway
point.
through which, yeah, entry point
Yeah.
into social justice. I began learning about feminism in my master's program when I had a teacher, and this was at a religious university. I
Hmm.
had a professor who was a feminist, and I was like, "Oh, you can be a Christian and a feminist? Like what?" And
Right.
then I went to Texas Tech University for my PhD, so it was a state university in Texas, and so I met people of all different cultures and backgrounds and religious backgrounds and atheists and everything in between and different races. And I had a couple of professors and also several students of my like classmates of mine who are really big into social justice, and they challenged me.
Mm.
And as a white woman who grew up in an upper middle class, very white neighborhood, I thought I was all tuned in culturally because,
Mm.
hey, my dad's British and I grew up traveling
Oh, yeah.
to England all the time and Europe, and which in itself was huge privilege. uh,
Yeah.
and I didn't really understand about white privilege and I didn't
Hmm.
understand the effect it had on me. And so that began that journey in that area. And then when I got my job at my academic job in 2006 at Alliant International University, and its main campus is in San Diego, California. One thing I really appreciated about the other professors in the marriage and family therapy graduate programs where I taught is that many of them, not all of them, but many of them were hugely into social justice. We had several international professors who were born in different countries and then immigrated to go to graduate school and then stayed, or people of different races. And they challenged me. And they really, I really had to dig in and look at my white privilege there. And then, and dig in and look at my straight privilege and my cisgender privilege. And I had to do a lot of work. And my students challenged me in a way, like in terms of their thinking and the way they view things and the conversations that we had. They really did. And they helped me grow. And when I learned about feminist theory and how it informed therapy, I did a deep dive into that. So the way that I see it in therapy and in coaching is that if I don't address things like race, gender, racism, sexism, misogyny, ableism, genderism, or whatever, all of the things, that I'm really being unethical as a therapist if I don't address that. As the therapist, it's especially being white, like it's my ethical duty to bring race into the room. And for me to say, because of the power differential, we try to minimize it as much as we can, the power differential between the therapist and the client, but you can't completely take it away, and because I'm the expert and having a doctor in front of my name is, there's people who are like, have that, I wouldn't say put you on a pedestal, but like you're seen as
it's a signaling, right?
Signaling, right? That's a good way to say it. And so it's my job to say, what is it like for you to work with a white therapist, of European descent,
right?
And just for us to have the conversation, and that opens the door so we can have the conversation. So, what is it like for you to be a Black gay woman in Southern California, or a Latina straight cisgendered woman in Texas, or whatever, and to have those conversations. And for me, it's really important. There's mansplaining, and then there's race-splaining. There's gay-splaining. There's all explaining because I'm straight. And so it's important for me to not to do that and to respect their lived experience, even though I have experience and knowledge and have done a lot of reading, research, and studying of these areas. I still have blinders on because I'm cis white straight. And even if I'm working with someone else in a fat body, I can't assume that I know their experience if they're in a larger body. Their experience may be very different from mine. And so it's important for me to take that one down position and say, please help me understand. And if I am moving into this area of assuming anything, just please let me know. So it's important for me to give permission to that. And I really believe that if you don't address social justice as part of recovery, and especially with binge eating, because you have it doesn't always accompany being in a larger body, but it does accompany anti-fat bias. Because when there's binging, there's always restriction, and people are having obsessive thoughts and feelings about their appearance. And what we know that fat phobia, anti-fat bias, is based in racism, based on what Dr. Sabrina String's work out of University of California, Irvine, and her amazing book, Fearing the Black Body. And so if we don't address that, then we're missing a huge part of the picture that could be incredibly transformative to people of any race. And it's also my job as a therapist to gauge how receptive people are to hearing that, because in the beginning of
Mm-hmm.
therapy, they may not be as receptive. Although some of my clients, they've done other work and they're like, yeah, let's dive in. Social justice. Woo.
Yeah. Yeah. They're
Yes,
all in
I've read
different
that book,
places. Yeah.
And then there's other people, it's like you have to just do some more work and build the therapeutic relationship before you can go
Mm-hmm.
there. And for them to be able to really hear it and not just have
Mm-hmm.
this, no, fat is bad. Ugh. And it's
Mm-hmm.
okay, let that I said something, let's let that marinate for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll come back to it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing all of that development, because I agree intersectional feminism is so critical to this work. And a lot of folks in my clinical work have come to me with binge eating disorder with the sincere, desperate desire to stop so they can lose weight,
Oh,
right? And
I think that's probably
like
like
100% of it, right?
yeah, I would say 90 from my
90%,
experience.
yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
And then to offer an alternative perspective, which is let's zoom out and look at where did this fear of fatness come from, and like where is that embedded and how did that get played out in your story, I think is key, and anchoring back into all of what we're learning around these different systems, white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, that are all colluding in that is
Yes, white
so key.
supremacy, patriarchy, those are the terms that I forgot to include. But yeah,
The
all
big
those things.
three.
Yes, the big
Yeah.
three. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know from my own experience, like zooming out and seeing all those broader social systems was a real game changer in my trajectory for my recovery. Of my desire for body liberation has to be for other people, but it also has to include me and the collective liberation that's existed in that. So
Yes.
thank you. And
Yes.
so to drill in a little bit more on binge eating and that cycle, can you walk us through like a cycle of someone who might be caught in binge eating? I'll tell the context of where this question is coming from. I think a lot of folks that come to work with me might call it like food addiction, for an
Yeah.
example. And I think it's really important to like qualify like what is binge eating disorder actually? And you've already mentioned like the role restriction plays. So I was hoping we could walk that through a little bit further.
What we know about binge eating disorder in terms of the research is researchers have done MRIs on people with binge eating disorder, and they've compared their brains to brains of people without any eating disorder. And when they compare the images, what they found is that people with binge eating disorder, there are areas of the brain that aren't working as efficiently and as effectively compared to people without binge eating disorder. And those
Mhm.
areas of the brain include emotion regulation, the regulation of hunger and fullness cues, or sending hunger and fullness signals. They include being able to be aware of the consequences of certain behaviors. There's like an area of brain that regulates that. The area of the brain that has to do with impulse control, that's also another big piece. And there are some other components, but those are the main areas of the brain that need healing. And that's where
Mhm.
neuroplasticity comes in, is
Yeah.
that as we learn and as we change our thoughts, change our behaviors, we can create new neural pathways in our brain and
Mhm.
actually make those areas of the brain that aren't functioning as efficiently as and effectively to function efficiently and effectively. Now, a huge caveat is that in order to do that, you need to become more nourished. And
Mhm.
that's where I think the term food addiction is just, I understand where people are coming from. And there's a long history of people talking about food addiction, especially
Yeah.
sugar addiction,
Yeah.
which
Mm.
came from a study that was
Yeah. Bad
disconcerting.
science.
It may feel like an addiction, like your brain may be
Mhm.
telling you, like, well, I'm thinking about this all the time and I struggle with compulsion with these behaviors. So
Mhm.
why is it that not, similar to like how I feel about using weed or opioid medications or alcohol or those kinds of things?
Yeah.
And well, it is different because there's, well, weed, it's like its own separate category, but with like substance use, there are chemical components of the substance that changes things. And so we're going to set that aside and not talk about that right now. But food addiction, I think one of the biggest differences is that you still have to eat.
Yeah, it's not an option. That's a
Yeah,
vital.
yeah, you don't need alcohol to survive. You don't need those substances to survive, right? If you take away the opioid medications, it's not, people are going to be in more pain, but it's not like they're going to die. If we take away food, people will die.
Yeah.
And so you have to learn how to manage food. And the counterintuitive thing is everyone with binge eating disorder is undernourished in some way.
Yeah.
And people might be thinking,
How is that
what?
possible?
That's crazy. I can't stop eating. I'm like, well, nourishment may mean there are certain categories of foods that you're not eating. It may mean that you're not feeling satiated when you eat, or maybe you are, and this is quite common with binge eating disorder, you're not eating enough food in the mornings, and then you're eating a lot in the evening. So you build up a glucose deficit and feel like you're out of control with food, because physiologically the glucose deficit is running the show, right? Your body's like, need food now. And stopping that is like standing in front of a bullet train with your hand up going, stop. It's really important to understand that binging disorder is a brain disorder, and you have to psychologically heal that with therapy or binge eating recovery program like mine. And you have to heal it physiologically, and that's with nutrition.
Yeah.
And that's why it's really important to learn how to nourish yourself and focus on eating mechanically, which is eating regularly throughout the day, typically 3 meals, 2 to 3 snacks, and having at least 3 components. So it's the rule of threes: 3 meals, 3 snacks, and at least 3 components: carb, fat, protein in each eating event. And really moving into that to make sure that you feel nourished and satiated, and you're not swinging from this restriction to binging and then feeling uncomfortable, ashamed, and say, okay, I'm going to restrict again, which again builds up the glucose deficit. But then psychologically, it feels very uncomfortable in your brain because you're not feeding yourself like you need to and not meeting your needs. And so you combine the physiological deprivation and the psychological deprivation, and that sets you up for another binge, and then on and on it goes. Okay.
Yeah, it really contrasts with, I think, what diet culture prescribes for people who are binge eating, which is like a diet or a plan, which is more deprivation and food scarcity psychologically, and perpetuates the cycle of.
Yes, absolutely. And fosters undernourishment. Basically, that's what Ozempic does, is that causes people to restrict food and deprives them of food. Often when people get off of it, the pendulum swings the other way, because your body's, I need nourishment. I've been in this famine state for so long.
Yeah. And it's really bothersome to me how there's lots of things about these GLP-1s that's really bothersome to me, but it just is fitting the mold of what we've seen with any other diet, any other like weight loss medication. Is it's workable as long as you can sustain it. But the thing is no one can sustain it. And there's same with Ozempic. We don't have this data beyond a couple of years of what happens, right? When people's hunger cues start to change or come back or what have you, your body is still going to give you the information of feed me. That is a survival tactic. We can't override that long term.
Yes, we could talk probably about that for 5 hours.
Totally. Yeah, that's a whole like series of this podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Something else I was wondering if we could talk a bit about is some of your work on atypical anorexia and how there's a lot of systemic reasons that's not in the DSM and things like that. But I was hoping you could give us a little bit of insight around what atypical anorexia is.
I had an atypical anorexia when I was in middle school. So
Mm-hmm.
seventh and eighth grade. So ages like 12 to 12 and 13, basically. I was severely restricting. I was not binging at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I was severely restricting. Like I vividly remember counting calories and severely restricting my food. I dropped weight and I experienced amenorrhea. I lost my period and no one thought anything of it because I'm using air quotes here, I
Yeah.
didn't look like I had anorexia. Now, this
Right.
was in the 80s when people were totally clueless about eating disorders. And anorexia had a very specific look. And I think it still does. Is that
Yeah.
when people say anorexia, they think people who are very thin and
Mm-hmm.
who are very obviously undernourished.
Mm-hmm.
And looking back at myself in those middle school years, I was severely undernourished. Oh my
Right.
gosh. That poor little girl. Like she was
Mm-hmm.
just so wrapped up in that. And she was getting so many compliments about the weight loss. And
Yeah.
so, of course, she was going to continue to engage in this and engage in all the behaviors and not have they didn't really use the BMI back then, although it existed, but
Mm-hmm.
I, I was below my growth curve, but they
Mm.
weren't even looking at that like
Right.
back then.
Right.
And so, although I had just had a memory pop in my mind,
Mm.
is that I remember, again, I was really obsessed about food, eating, and my body. And I would go into my pediatrician and I would cry because I felt like I was fat. And I had a
Mm.
pediatrician say your underwear is literally hanging off of you know, not in a critical way, but in what's going on in your mind is not matching reality.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
he was like
Huh.
physicians even today, they are they get zero training on eating
Oh,
disorder.
so yeah,
And
underinformed.
he didn't pick up on that. No one picked up on that. It was always seen as a good thing that I dropped so much weight
Yeah.
and I was suffering from anorexia.
Yeah.
It's very important for us to validate that and to emphasize that eating disorders don't have a look.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anorexia doesn't have a look.
Yeah. And it's very medically dangerous, regardless of body
Yes.
size, right?
Yes. I was so undernourished. Like bad things could have happened to me. I don't
Yeah.
know. It did. My period stopped. I was
Hmm.
like, oh, I thought that was normal. And then I started thinking
Hmm.
about it as an eating disorder professional. I'm like, no, that wasn't normal.
That was not okay.
That was
Yeah.
not okay. It's really important for us to attend to that. There's really controversy about the name or the term
Yeah.
atypical anorexia because a lot of people think it just all should be called anorexia,
Oh,
regardless
yeah, sure.
of body size.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Our DSM, our limited
Oh
DSM.
my gosh.
There's that's
Oh
another
my
podcast
gosh.
series,
That's
Dr.
another part.
Marianne.
Oh, dude. Yeah, we could do a deep dive.
Yeah. What does it mean for you to take up space in your own life right now?
That's really interesting that you asked because I am doing a lot of taking up space as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
In order to grow your business, you have to do a lot of work, and there's a lot of like money mindsets that are come in, and when that you have to like work through, like money blocks or whatever. And not anybody's in the entrepreneur space, they know about that.
Hmm.
And one thing I didn't realize is that the relationship between some of my attitudes and beliefs that I developed around money were intertwined with my relationship around my attitudes and beliefs about food. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So I literally like the past few weekends, I've been
Mm.
reading books on this and journaling like a mad woman, like in a good way.
Yeah.
On it, and I've just been really doing things and really leaning into self-love throughout all this
Mm.
process,
Mm.
forgiving myself for having limiting beliefs because it wasn't my fault. It was just, again, a lot of it was multi-generational transmission of belief systems about money and belief
Mhm.
systems about food and all of the intertwiningness. I just made
Mhm.
up a word, yay, about all of that. So yeah, so that's why I'm taking up space. And as a woman to say that, I even hesitated a little bit saying, oh gosh, I want to bring up money. Oh, but
Mhm.
let's no, that's the work I'm doing because it
Yeah.
affects everything.
Yes. That's a really lovely combination to reflect on, like how our relationship with money mimics these other relationships with food
Yep.
or
Yep.
desire, appetite, indulgence. There's lots there.
Yeah, and the money that you spend on food or the money that you
Yes.
restrict, it's
Yes.
just that, yeah, it's
Yeah, those
all,
cycles play out there too.
yeah, all the things.
Oh, such good stuff, Dr. Marianne. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, this
If
is
fo-
great, Cassie.
if folks want to find you, where would you recommend they start?
Start on Instagram, so at Dr. Marianne Miller, and my first name is spelled in the French way, so it's Mariane. So at Dr. Marianne Miller. My website is drmariannemiller.com. You can sign up for a free launching your eating disorder download and get on my mailing list. I have some really cool stuff there available, like the binge eating recovery membership. And then I have an ARFID, an online self-paced ARFID course that's coming out in July. So
That's exciting.
yeah,
Oh, I'm so happy for that.
yeah.
We need more
And
resources for
yeah,
folks with
so
ARFID.
much more. So
Yeah,
yeah, so people can contact me that way, or they can email me at hello@drmariannemiller.com.
amazing. Thank you again so much for being
Oh, it's
here.
my
We'll link
pleasure.
all of that in the show
Great.
notes.
Thank you. Thanks, Cass.
And for everyone listening, thanks so much for being here. And I hope you all find some ways to take up a little more space this week. Thank you for listening to Taking Up Space. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and found it to be a resource for you in your own embodiment, healing, and body liberation journey. I hope you can continue the conversation with me over on social media by sharing your thoughts, offering your ideas and suggestions for future episodes, or just connecting. You can find me on Instagram at Inner Atlas Therapy. If you liked this episode and want to support the show, please subscribe, rate, and review the show in your preferred podcast platform. And share this episode with a friend. This ensures that more people can find the pod and will amplify our message of body liberation for all. If you haven't checked it out yet, I have a free Taking Up Space workbook available. This workbook will have you engage in self-reflection and embodied practices as you navigate your own journey of taking up space. You can find this free resource on my website, inneratlastherapy.com. I'll also link in the show notes some additional resources I've developed in my online shop to help you deepen into your own embodiment, healing, and body liberation work. Thanks again for being here. And until next time, I hope you join me in the resistance and find some ways to take up space this week. I'll see you next time.